First of all, welcome back to Newcastle for many of you. Many of you are familiar faces. The whole idea about these meetings is really to give us a chance to tell you about certain aspects of mitochondrial disease, but also to tell you about the latest bits of what we're trying to do to help. So this fourth one that we've held, I just want to make people aware that we are videoing it again. We videoed it last time and we put all the videos actually onto the web, onto YouTube and onto our own website that Dr. McFarland will talk to you about. The idea is that clearly for many people it's very difficult to come here, and what we want to do is, if you can I say misguided enough to want to listen to us again, you can look at it on the website. It's just sometimes things aren't initially very clear, and it's maybe clearer on the website. What's the purpose of this meeting? Well, as ever, it is about trying to provide information that you want. It's about trying to interact with you. It's about giving you the opportunity for you to interact with us in a situation which is outside of the clinic. Because I know that the clinic situation can be a bit inhibiting. So what we're going to do, we've changed the order around slightly from, was covering the same topics as we put in, but we've changed the order around slightly. So we are going to talk a little bit about the role of the physiotherapist. No, we're going to talk a lot about the role of the physiotherapist. We're going to talk about some of the clinical research. And the basis of that is, we wanted to do that because there are posters around the room which give some details about the research and that you may want to pick up on immediately after. And we've got a coffee and tea break, which I think hopefully will be helpful for you. And then Dr. McFarland, who rather like me is a frequent speaker at these meetings, is going to talk about childhood mitochondrial disease. And I know that's not relevant for some of you, but for others it is. And even if it's not relevant, it might be of interest to you. And then I'm going to say something about genetic counselling in mitochondrial disease and some of the newer techniques. Again, things which may not be relevant for some of you, but as very relevant for others. So I always put this slide up just so that people know that in this sort of format, it's very difficult for us to answer specific questions about specific clinical problems that you have. I think all of you come to our clinic, and that's where those sort of questions should be dealt with, kind of in the privacy of the clinic room. We're happy to try and answer any questions that you have. It's just, obviously it's slightly difficult to answer very specific questions. General questions are very easy to answer. Okay. I have to say this, partly because some people are here for the very first time. Lots of you have heard me say this before. And really, what are mitochondria? What's mitochondrial disease? And you're going to keep hearing this analogy between mitochondria and batteries. Sometimes people talk about it as being like mitochondria, like power packs that go into a laptop computer. They clearly are absolutely essential for all of us. And if you don't have mitochondria, simply then you cannot survive. So they're essential batteries. And they need it. Every cell needs a battery, just like my generation, the transistor radio. The current generation, an iPod, needs a power supply. But the rest of it might be very, very complicated and sophisticated, but if it doesn't have a power supply, it ain't ever going to work properly. And that's why mitochondrial problems can present in very different ways. So these batteries are called mitochondria, and they generate the energy in the cell. That's predominantly what they do. They have some other rather subtle functions, but the basic bottom line is that you need these to provide energy. So what happens when they start to fail? And that's really the nature of the talk that we're going to do today, certainly Dr. McFarland's talk in terms of relationship to childhood mitochondrial problems. And the real thing here is that, of course, every bit of us needs that power supply. And that varies between different patients, and between different ages, and therefore it means that one of the things that's remarkable is that, in fact, no two patients are the same, a point I'm going to come back to later. That you might have exactly the same problem in the battery, but it might manifest itself in very different ways. So the sorts of things that we see are problems with the muscles, with muscle weakness or eye muscle weakness. We get neurological symptoms, things that are such as problems with our balance. Sometimes we get heart problems, and sometimes we get diabetes. And these can all be due to mitochondrial problems. It doesn't mean you're going to get them. I'm just saying that that's why the symptoms are so varied. And recently, which we will hear about later, is I was interviewed about some of the work that we were doing, and somebody said, well, name us a mitochondrial disease. And that's why it's so difficult for us to say, well, it's a very clear-cut pattern, because it does affect so many tissues.